Bryce Young, the Heisman winner, the first overall pick, the golden boy of college football. But in the NFL, 62 sacks, 2 wins, endless criticism. The Panthers gambled their future to get him. Now fans are calling him one of the biggest busts in NFL history. But is this really the end of Bryce Young's story? Or is it just the beginning of his greatest comeback? From Pasadena to Alabama, Bryce Young spent his life proving doubters wrong. This time, the stakes are higher, the pressure is suffocating, and the world is watching. Will he rise above the chaos, or will his struggles define him forever? Before the NFL spotlight, before the Heisman Trophy and the accolades, Bryce Young was just a kid with a dream that no amount of doubt or criticism could shake. Born in Pasadena, California, Bryce grew up in a family that believed in hard work, faith, and perseverance. His parents, Craig and Julie Young, were his first coaches in life. Bryce wasn't handed success. He had to work for every inch. From a young age, it was clear Bryce wasn't the biggest player on the field. In a game built for giants, he was always the smallest. But where some saw a disadvantage, Bryce saw an opportunity. He developed the tools no defense could take away: precision, quick decision-making, and an ironclad mindset. His father, Craig, always told him, "Control what you can control," and that's exactly what Bryce did. When Bryce joined Mater Dei High School, one of the most storied football programs in the country, the whispers of doubt only grew louder. He's too small. He won't make it. Bryce heard it all, but he didn't listen. He let his play speak for him. Under the Friday night lights, surrounded by players who dwarfed him in size, Bryce stood tall in the moments that mattered most. Over 4 years, he threw for over 13,000 yards and 152 touchdowns. He led Mater Dei to a 46-6 record, carving out a legacy in one of the toughest football programs in America. Bryce didn't just survive, he thrived, and he did it his way. But Bryce's story isn't just about football, it's about the fire within him. Late nights studying film, early mornings grinding through workouts. Bryce wasn't trying to prove anyone wrong. He was trying to prove himself right. When Alabama called, Bryce made the leap from the West Coast to the heart of college football. But even as a 5-star recruit, doubts followed him. The SEC is a battlefield where the hits are harder and the critics are louder. They said he wouldn't last, but Bryce had been underestimated his whole life. From the streets of Pasadena to the packed stadiums of Alabama, Bryce Young carried the same mindset. Never let anyone else define your limits. In every step of his journey, Bryce was building something stronger than stats or trophies. He was building resilience. The kind of resilience that doesn't crack under pressure. The kind of resilience that turns whispers of doubt into roars of triumph. Great players aren't born, they're made. Bryce Young proved that when he dominated at Mater Dei High School and set his sights on the University of Alabama, a program where greatness isn't just expected, it's demanded. Every throw, every decision was under a microscope. But for Bryce, pressure was where he thrived. Starting as a backup to Mac Jones in 2020, Bryce quietly prepared, turning every rep into a step towards something bigger. By 2021, he was ready, and he didn't just play. He owned college football, over 4,800 passing yards, 47 touchdowns, and SEC championship, and a trip to the national title game. Bryce was unshakable calm under pressure, precise, and composed when his team needed him most. Then came the moment that defined his Alabama legacy, the Heisman Trophy. Bryce Young became the first quarterback in school history to win college football's greatest honor, silencing every critic who said he was too small or too unconventional. By the time his career ended, Bryce had thrown for over 8,000 passing yards, 80 touchdowns, and just 12 interceptions, exceeding every expectation. And then came the NFL draft. Desperate for their next franchise star, the Carolina Panthers traded away everything to make Bryce Young the first overall pick. Suddenly, he wasn't just a quarterback, he was the face of a franchise. The spotlight was blinding, and the pressure was suffocating. But Bryce had been here before. He had overcome the odds before. And now, as he stood at the pinnacle of his career, the question wasn't if he could succeed, it was how far he could go. Except this time, the challenges would be unlike anything he had ever faced. And Bryce Young's biggest test was about to begin. The NFL is where legends are either made or forgotten. For Bryce Young, the first overall pick, the pressure wasn't just heavy, it was suffocating. The Carolina Panthers gambled everything to get him. But from the very first snap, Bryce faced an uphill battle. Behind a crumbling offensive line, he was sacked 62 times more than any first overall pick since David Carr. When he did have time to throw, his receivers couldn't get open, leaving Bryce to make impossible plays. The result? 11 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, 2 wins. The whispers turned to shouts. Bust, disappointment, overrated. Bryce was compared to the biggest draft failures in NFL history, and the criticism followed him everywhere: headlines, networks, and social media. But the harshest blow came from within. For the first time, Bryce's quiet confidence began to crack. How do you keep going when everything is falling apart? How do you silence doubt when the world is telling you to stop? And yet, even in the chaos, Bryce refused to break. There were fleeting moments, perfect throws under pressure, a third down conversion when it mattered most that reminded everyone of his poise, his precision, and the talent that had once made him unstoppable. Bryce Young's rookie season revealed who he truly was: a fighter. While the world called him a bust, Bryce refused to let his story end here, because when the pressure is at its worst, that's when the best rise. And Bryce Young was about to remind everyone why he was chosen first overall. Moments of resilience, signs of hope in the NFL. Success isn't measured by how many times you win. It's measured by how many times you get back up. And after a brutal rookie season, Bryce Young had every reason to stay down. 62 sacks, endless criticism, only 2 wins. But here's the thing about Bryce Young: quitting was never an option. Amidst the chaos of his first year, there were still glimpses, moments where the player who dominated at Alabama, who won the Heisman Trophy, showed up and reminded the world why he was drafted first overall. It started with his decision-making. Even when the pocket collapsed around him, Bryce stayed calm, making smart, calculated reads. Analysts pointed to his accuracy. Bryce Young had one of the league's highest completion rates when throwing to receivers in tight coverage. His precision was still there. It was just buried beneath the dysfunction around him. There were games where Bryce refused to let the noise get to him. Against the Kansas City Chiefs, one of the best defenses in football, Bryce stepped up. His throws were sharper, his pocket presence more deliberate. He was moving with confidence. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Bryce Young looked like a starting NFL quarterback today. That's what one analyst said after the game. And in a season defined by struggles, those words felt like hope. Bryce also started showing flashes of his playmaking magic. In moments when everything seemed lost, Bryce found a way to create. A rollout to his right, a defender breathing down his neck, a flick of the wrist, and the ball was placed perfectly, right where only his receiver could catch it. Plays like these were small victories, but they mattered. They were proof that Bryce hadn't lost what made him special. But more than anything else, what stood out was his resilience. Bryce Young wasn't just surviving, he was learning. With every sack, every missed opportunity, and every tough loss, Bryce was absorbing the lessons that every great quarterback has to learn the hard way. Players like Peyton Manning, who threw 28 interceptions as a rookie, like Jared Goff, who was labeled a bust after his first season, like Josh Allen, who struggled so much early on that fans questioned if the Bills had made a mistake. All of them had moments where the world doubted them, and all of them came back stronger. Bryce Young's rookie year didn't break him. It hardened him, because every time he got knocked down, he got back up. He kept fighting, and more importantly, he kept believing. Believing that one day, the pieces would fall into place, that the offensive line would hold, that his receivers would get open, that he would get a real chance to show the world what he could do. Bryce Young was still the same player who won at every level, he just needed time. And as the season drew to a close, those small glimpses of hope became something more. Bryce was moving better. His confidence was growing. His teammates started believing in him. Fans began to wonder, what if this kid isn't a bust? What if he's just getting started? Because history has shown us one undeniable truth: the greatest comebacks are born from the darkest moments. Bryce Young's rookie year may have been a nightmare, But nightmares don't last forever. And now, as he enters his second season, one question hangs in the air. What happens when Bryce Young finally gets the chance to silence the doubters? Because if there's one thing we know about Bryce Young, it's this: when the world counts him out, that's when he's at his very best. In football, talent can only take you so far. The game isn't just about strength or speed. It's about what happens in your mind when everything falls apart. For Bryce Young, that mental battle has defined his entire career. Because while the world sees his struggles, what they don't see is the resilience that refuses to let him quit. Bryce Young's calm demeanor isn't just an act, it's who he is. From the days of being doubted at Mater Day to the grueling spotlight of the NFL, Bryce has never let his emotions control him. Opponents could tower over him. Coaches could question him. Fans could doubt him. But Bryce stayed the same, focused, steady, and confident. That confidence was tested harder than ever during his rookie season. Every week, he was battered behind a collapsing offensive line, thrown into chaos by a team that couldn't find stability. 11 touchdowns, 62 sacks, 2 wins. Failure, that's what the headlines called it. But Bryce refused to let those numbers define him. After every hit, he stood back up. After every loss, he watched the film. After every mistake, he looked for a lesson. While the critics wrote him off, Bryce was quietly building something stronger, a mindset that wouldn't break under pressure. Even his teammates noticed it. Veteran players spoke about Bryce's unwavering poise in the locker room. How, after a tough loss, Bryce didn't point fingers or lose control. Instead, he walked in, held his head high, and said, "We're going to get better. I'm going to get better." That kind of leadership is rare, especially from a rookie who had every reason to crumble under the weight of expectations. The truth is, Bryce Young knows the path to greatness isn't easy. He's studied the stories of quarterbacks who came before him: Peyton Manning, who threw more interceptions than touchdowns as a rookie; Josh Allen, who was mocked for his inaccuracy; Jared Goff, who was labeled a bust before leading his team to a Super Bowl. Bryce understands that greatness is forged in failure, that every setback is an opportunity to grow. And Bryce has always been a learner. During his rookie season, he spent extra hours with coaches, breaking down film, studying defenses, and looking for ways to improve. He reached out to mentors, former quarterbacks who had walked this path before him. He worked harder, knowing that mental resilience isn't built overnight, it's built every day. In the moments when no one is watching, Bryce Young isn't the kind of player who throws his hands up and blames the world. He isn't the kind of player who gives in to doubt. He's the kind of player who looks adversity in the eye and says, "I'll be back." Because Bryce knows that his story isn't over. The critics may see him as a bust, but Bryce sees the bigger picture: a career that's just getting started. And for every rookie quarterback who struggled early, there was a turning point, a moment when the work, the patience, and the belief finally paid off. The question is, has Bryce Young reached his turning point? Because while the world doubts him, Bryce Young is preparing for something bigger, something that could change the course of his career forever. And for those who have already counted him out, they might just be in for a surprise. The turning point. Can Bryce Young overcome the bust label? Every great quarterback has a moment where everything changes. For some, it's a game-winning drive that silences the critics. For others, it's a season that redefines their legacy. But for Bryce Young, that turning point hasn't come yet. The question isn't whether he's good enough, it's whether he'll get the chance to prove it. The Carolina Panthers knew the cost of drafting Bryce Young. They gave up future first-round picks, star players, and their very foundation to bring him to Charlotte. That kind of trade doesn't just create pressure, it demands results. But the Panthers weren't ready. Bryce wasn't drafted into stability. He was drafted into chaos. A shaky offensive line, receivers who couldn't separate, coaches who couldn't agree on how to use him. No quarterback could succeed in those conditions, let alone a rookie trying to learn the speed of the NFL. Bryce was sacked over 60 times in his first season, 60 times where he had no chance, 60 times where his confidence could have been shattered. The hits took their toll physically, but the real battle was mental. How do you trust your pocket when it keeps collapsing? How do you trust your arm when every throw feels like it's under siege? Yet, even with all those struggles, There were moments that hinted at what Bryce Young could become. His accuracy, when given even a sliver of time, was undeniable. He could hit receivers in stride, threading throws between defenders with the kind of touch that few quarterbacks possess. He made the right reads under pressure, showed flashes of his elite football IQ, and proved that his struggles weren't a lack of skill, but a lack of opportunity. The Panthers front office now faces a critical moment. They must ask themselves, are we going to ruin another young quarterback, or are we going to build around him? History is full of cautionary tales, talented players whose careers were wasted because teams failed to protect or support them. David Carr, Sam Darnold, Josh Rosen, all of them had potential, but none of them had the chance to fulfill it. For Bryce Young, this offseason is the turning point. The Panthers need to invest in him, not just with words, but with action. It starts with the offensive line. Bryce needs protection time to stand tall in the pocket, time to make the throws that made him great at Alabama. Without that foundation, no quarterback can succeed. He also needs weapons. The Panthers' receiving corps has been one of the least effective in the NFL. In college, Bryce had receivers who could make plays, who could turn good throws into touchdowns. In Carolina, he's throwing to aging veterans and young players still trying to find their footing. That must change. But it's not just about the team. Bryce Young himself has work to do. He must take the lessons from his rookie season, the sacks, the interceptions, the doubt, and use them as fuel. He has to trust his instincts again. He has to believe in his ability to create magic when plays break down. That's what made him special at Alabama. And that's what will save his career in the NFL. We've seen this story before. A young quarterback struggles early, critics pile on, and the world labels him a bust. But then, with time, patience, and the right pieces around him, everything changes. Josh Allen in Buffalo, Jared Goff in Los Angeles, Geno Smith in Seattle. They were counted out until they weren't. So the question remains, will Bryce Young get his turning point? Will he become the franchise quarterback Carolina dreamed of? Or will he join the list of what could have been? One thing is certain, Bryce isn't done fighting. The doubt, the pressure, the setbacks, they're all part of his story. And just like he's done at every stage of his career, Bryce Young is preparing to rise again. Because when you've been doubted your entire life, proving people wrong isn't a setback, it's just another opportunity. But what happens next? What happens if Bryce Young gets the protection, the weapons, and the time he deserves? Well, that's where legends are made. Stories of greatness are built one moment at a time. And if you've made it this far, you already know this isn't just Bryce Young's story. It's a story about resilience, hope, and redemption. And if you love stories like this, where players fight through doubt to find their greatness, then join us by hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel, because this is just the beginning. Bryce Young's journey isn't finished. Far from it. When the Carolina Panthers drafted Bryce first overall, they weren't just drafting a quarterback, they were investing in a dream. A dream that a young man who had defied the odds at every level could do it again. A dream that a kid from Pasadena, who had spent his entire life proving people wrong, could become their franchise savior. But dreams are never easy. They are tested, they are battered, and sometimes they're nearly broken. Bryce Young's first season was more than just a struggle. It was a war against expectations, against chaos, against doubt. Every sack, every interception, every headline calling him a bust could have been the end of his story. But Bryce Young doesn't quit, because when you've spent your whole life fighting against the odds, the struggle becomes part of who you are. The mental toughness that brought Bryce from Mater Dei to Alabama, from Heisman glory to the NFL, didn't disappear. It's still there, stronger than ever. And now, Bryce Young stands at a crossroads. For the critics, it's already over. For the fans, the doubts linger. But for Bryce Young, this is just another challenge, another chapter, another chance to prove that greatness isn't about where you start. It's about how you respond when the world counts you out. The path forward won't be easy. Bryce still has mountains to climb. But history shows us that the greatest quarterbacks, Peyton Manning, Josh Allen, Jared Goff, They all struggled before they rose. Bryce Young's struggles might just be the foundation of something incredible. So what will Bryce Young's story become? Will he rise above the noise and reclaim his future? Will he silence the doubters and fulfill the promise of his talent? Or is this exactly where legends are born? If you want to see more stories like Bryce Young's about quarterbacks fighting against all odds, just click on the playlist popping up right now. And remember, it's not the struggles that define a player, it's what they do next.